Hello, and welcome to the CBD Bible, Cannabis and the Wellness Revolution that will change your life with Dr. Dani Gordon. I'm Helen Bagnall. I'm one of the founders of Salon London, where we work with academics, experts and authors so we can get up close to the big ideas of our time. And we have watched with extreme interest over the last few years at Salon London as this whole debate about cannabis has moved from its focus on its status as an illegal drug to the ultimate new wellness ingredient. And yet this new world of CBD and medical cannabis seems to be a world full of misinformation, of confusion and pseudoscience, which you will know is our least favourite type of science. So we were very much in need of clarification, and we wanted to take a tour around the world of CBD and medical cannabis. And our speaker tonight is Dr. Dani Gordon. We're in very good hands. She is a double board certified medical doctor and integrative medical physician. And I'm going to leave it to her to explain what the phrase integrative medical physician or doctor means. It's really essential we know, and it's a fascinating definition of where we are in terms of the use of cannabis within medicine today. She also leads the world in expertise in CBD, cannabis medicine, brain and stress resilience. She also studied mind-body medicine at Harvard. Sounds amazing. Co-founded the UK's Medical Cannabis Clinicians Society and set up the UK's first cannabis medicines clinics. So, Dani, how are you? It's Dani, hello.
Hi.
hello. It's launch week of your book. It's normally a wonderful time. How are you enjoying it?
Well, it's great considering the circumstances, Helen, and it's actually been really nice in a way to do more online events. So I get to reach people in all sorts of areas and regions, not just who can join me in person. So yeah, I'm an optimist. So yes, it's been very nice.
All of our best Salon speakers are optimists. I love it. I'm going to be talking to Dani about the history of cannabis and its role to help with chronic pain, anxiety, brain aging and stress. But she covers so much more in the book. I just wanted to flag insomnia, fatigue, low health, depression, gut health, libido, autoimmune conditions. So I'm not sure we're going to be able to cover all of these subjects in our short salon together, but please do type in or let me know by text what your question is, and I will put them to Dani. So my first question is really about your story, Dani, as I try not to use the word journey there. But I just want to know how you as a medical doctor became aware of the uses of cannabis and CBD for treating patients. And you say in your book you moved in your role as a doctor from being a cannabis skeptic to being cannabis convinced. So tell us, how did this happen?
So basically it was, I think, really a 15-year journey when I really think about it, probably even since my childhood, because when I grew up in the United States in the war on drugs era. So for me, cannabis was this really scary drug of abuse growing up. And then when I went to medical school as a young doctor, I was learning all about medicines, and I thought I was going to go there and learn how to make people feel better and kind of live a healthier lifestyle and more preventative strategies. But instead, we really focused on drugs. And the only thing I learned about cannabis in medical school was that it was a dangerous drug of abuse. It can make people go psychotic who were quote unquote normal. And it was a gateway drug into basically a descent, a terrible spiral into madness and, being on the street, basically. So that's a pretty negative view of cannabis. So when I really finished my conventional medicine training, and then I did my residency, my specialty in family medicine, and I went to hang up my shingle about 10 years ago and started practicing as a family doctor. I was still studying really evidence-based natural medicine, which is integrated medicine, and part of that is botanical and plant medicine. And what I was starting to see with my patients is that the drugs alone weren't really working so well in a lot of these chronic conditions. You know, we don't throw away the drugs. We still need drugs in many cases for many diseases. But I was using things like in my practice, like meditation, mindfulness, other herbals to support sleep and stress. And the only one I really wasn't using was cannabis, but my patients were using it. So my patients in British Columbia, Canada, they were growing cannabis. A lot of them were putting it through a juicer in the morning. So the raw cannabis, they were making their own tinctures. I started to speak to people in the local community, how they were using it, how my patients were using it. And really, that was my first introduction was my patients. And I was seeing how it was helping them from everything from end-of-life care and palliative care to chronic pain, weaning them down off of opioids. So I started to get a little bit involved. I started to research it and started to say, okay, well, maybe you should try a strain. Can you grow a strain? This is all was kind of gray zone. It was, they could get a license to grow in certain conditions, but I didn't really know what they're growing. So I started to say, well, can you send it off for a test? Can we increase the amount of CBD that's in it? And eventually this led to me prescribing cannabis. And I've prescribed it since for thousands of patients, and I've trained doctors here in the UK to do the same now. And along that way, really the tipping point to me actually prescribing it rather than just coaching my patients on the cannabis they were already using from dispensaries and grow owns, was that I became a chronic pain patient too. I had a really bad accident with my hand. I had a lot of really bad nerve pain. I was told after the second kind of semi-successful surgery that I'd have to be on gabapentin and other pain medications for probably forever. And I didn't want to take them. So I went to a medical conference where I ended up speaking the next year, the big integrated medicine conference in the United States. And one of my colleagues is a psychiatrist in Colorado. And he said, "What's up with your hand?" I had this big splint on. And so I gave him the whole story. And he goes, "Well, you should try some cannabis while you're here. It's California. You can, there's a stand over there. I'm sure they'll give you a sample." So anyways, I started to put on this topical cannabis balm on my hand. It made a huge difference to my nerve pain in a week. And I flew back to Canada, and that's when I decided, okay, I really have to take the next step, because now I've seen for myself firsthand what this can do, and it's just a topical. It's so safe, and that was really the start of it all. And then just since then, I became a huge advocate because it's changed my patients' lives.
Yeah. So I've seen, and we were talking just before we came on air about integrated medicine, and it was really fascinating to hear you say how it's become a specialty in its own right, like cardiology, etc., etc. I just wondered if you could just give us that definition so we understand it.
Yes. So in the United States, it is a subspecialty of mainstream medicine now. So the definition of integrative medicine as a specialty is basically it considers all treatment approaches, all therapeutics, including drugs, conventional pharmaceutical drugs, including surgery when we need it, like I had with my hand, and including anything that's natural and is evidence-based. So that includes cannabis, that includes mindfulness-based stress reduction, which I also teach, and many other things that fall under that natural non-drug category, but have evidence and have growing evidence. And there's over 65 medical schools in the United States now that have integrated medicine programs or involved in some way. Harvard Medical School has an integrated medicine training program. UCLA, all the top ones do now. And that's a huge, huge shift. So it really is what I feel anyways, it's really the future of medicine. So it's not quite caught up in the UK yet, but now that I'm here, I think I'm talking about it more and people are starting to be more curious. And the grassroots have already started. So I think it really is the way of the future. It really is not alternative medicine versus conventional medicine. It's just, I always say it's just good medicine.
And it just sounds so hopeful, and to hear you describe it like that, it's so instantly understandable. It's really sorry, I've just got a message from my producer Dickon, and he just wants me to say that if we are working off a mobile signal, so if we go off air, please refresh your browser. Thanks, Dickon. Try working harder. Hello from Dickon to everyone there. So Dani, it's clear in the book that the range of things that CBD can be prescribed for, and I mentioned some at the beginning of the talk. You're very clear to say it's not a cure-all, but I really enjoyed reading you say in the book that you thought it was one of the most powerful drugs that you'd ever used in either Eastern or Western medicine. And I just thought, something so powerful, why has it fallen into such disrepute? Why is it not part of the drugs that we might naturally go to?
Well, as I found when I had to dig through all my own prejudices and, preconceived notions about this plant, um, I found that there's a lot of political baggage, and this plant has been really demonized in a very specific politicized way in the last century. So, up until the turn of the 20th century, cannabis was a perfectly respectable botanical medicine. It was sold in pharmacies. The Victorians used it, even though they were quite, moralistic in some other senses. And it really fell into disrepute really in the US. And there was a big movement during Prohibition in the 1920s, 1930s, really against cannabis. It was a very racist campaign against cannabis. It was a very hysterical campaign against cannabis. And the New York Academy of Science, like kind of the big medical body, the mainstream medical body at the time, actually looked at the evidence in the 1940s. And they said, actually, it's not causing, psychosis in everybody and everyone's going crazy. And it's not all these things they say. It's actually pretty safe medicine. But they just kind of ignored that evidence, and they proceeded to make it illegal even to study it. So until very recently, we couldn't even study this plant, let alone use it as a medicine. And the same thing happened in the United Kingdom. It was struck from the pharmacopoeia, which is basically a list of all the drugs you can prescribe as a medicine. And until very recently in this country, it was considered a drug of no medicinal value. And that changed, luckily, in 2018, and that's what we've been working on ever since. But really, that's kind of the history. There's a whole, I could go on. This could be a whole talk about the the unfair history of the plant. But really, that's kind of the summary. Yeah, exactly. Me and David that could talk about this for ages.
It does, I think it's really important. It's really important to know, because so that, as you say, there's a lot of confusion around cannabis, and I think one of the things that tends to be confusing about people who are thinking about using cannabis is that it has been claimed as a solution or a treatment for so many issues. And we live in a time where we're more used to highly specialized treatments for illnesses, that the way this is being presented to us can seem like a sort of unmedical panacea. Do you, I just wanted to ask you, as an expert, do you think bizarrely its potential effectiveness makes people suspicious?
Yes, absolutely. And there's a good reason for that. So this is the first slide when I teach doctors. The reason why it works for so many things, it's not a cure for all of these things, but it helps with the symptoms and sometimes even the underlying disease process in many cases, is because cannabis chemicals from plants like CBD and THC and many others, they work on a system that we have naturally in our own body. It's called our endocannabinoid system. So we have these receptors, these kind of docking stations all over the brain and the body, and the plant chemicals lock onto them and they do stuff in many different organs. So we have these kind of docking stations in different parts of the brain, in our immune system, in our gut, in our skin, in our reproductive tract. So these docking stations, when they lock onto CBD and THC, they do different things in different regions. And the reason why is because the system, the endocannabinoid system, its whole job is to maintain overall harmony and brain and body balance. So it's the balancing system. So that's why it works on so many things. It works on so many pathways, CBD especially, but THC as well. And that's why doctors are perplexed, because perplexingly, we don't get taught about the endocannabinoid system in medical school. It's like they left an entire, we get taught about the endocrine system and all the, the other happy hormone system, the neuropeptide systems of the brain, the serotonin system, and they just kind of leave it out. So, that's really confusing to doctors, because doctors say, well, this is how doctors' minds think. Doctors' minds think, if I didn't learn about it in medical school, it doesn't really exist. So that is changing slowly. Professor Nutt has started to teach. I've started to teach in medical schools about this as well. And many of my colleagues have as well. So it is changing, but that is what we're up against, that the general public doesn't really know about the endocannabinoid system. Doctors don't know about it. So we need to catch it up, really.
It's really interesting what's left out of medical school. We did a salon a couple of weeks ago on diets, and we heard there's so little on nutrition. Even
Half a day.
That's what he said. Half a day. I thought, oh,
half a day.
Half a day.
Oh my, yeah. I mean, nutritional medicine I studied as part of my integrated medicine fellowship for years, but it didn't come from medical school.
Well, hopefully that's worked out okay in the UK. Anyway, is that so? The example you've just given, is that a reason why you can? Is it a good way to think about cannabis as a bridge between drugs and botanical science?
I think absolutely. The cannabis plant, especially CBD from hemp, I think because people can buy it over the counter, it's so safe. It's really a bridge for doctors to talk to really alternative practitioners who are maybe self-taught herbalists who have not entered a doctor's office in 40 years. I mean, what other plant can do this? It's bringing these worlds together that usually never meet. So I think it is a really great connector for people. And cannabis can be a drug when you use CBD kind of isolated from the plant by itself in very, very high doses for things like epilepsy and even like antipsychotic properties, but it's also botanical medicine. So botanical medicines also, by their very nature, there's lots of active plant chemicals in the botanical medicine, like medical cannabis, for example, and full spectrum CBD from hemp even, that the amount of different pathways in the brain and the body that it's affecting is just so much bigger than a single pharmaceutical drug, which, like you said, we're used to. We're used to being like, okay, this is the drug target. This is what it's doing exactly in this method, exactly at this little docking station in the brain, and only at that little docking station. And then everything else, it doesn't touch. But cannabis, the cannabis plant and the plant chemicals, when you combine them, then they have a much broader and a much more complex effect on the brain and the body.
Okay, I think I've understood it. It is difficult to understand. It's sort of counterintuitive in some ways. You talked a little bit just earlier about this, about cannabis not being prescribed by doctors and the work that you were doing, and mentioned, Professor David Nutt is very involved in really getting doctors to see the potential in prescribing it. But it seems to be that there needs to be a massive mind shift in the UK profession to be able to capitalise on the benefits of this. How would you talk a bit about education, but how could this really come about? What would you do if you could?
So I'm already doing quite a bit. So I'm a member, I vice chair the Medical Cannabis Clinician Society, which is a nonprofit with myself and Professor Mike Barnes that we set up in November 2018. And it's all volunteer led. It's all physicians. And through that, I volunteer my time to mentor physicians in the UK. That's still an ongoing thing that I do. We put on educational events, unbiased material. So that is a big part of my work, is my volunteer nonprofit work. I also work with Professor David Nutt's group in drug science on their cannabis working group, with just an amazing group of colleagues. Some of the top researchers in the world are a member of that group. And so we're all really working together. I do the clinical side of it and the mentoring and speaking to doctors. I'm involved in some of the research. And then I support another number of different nonprofits on their executive boards. And I also do drug policy work. And I'm a member of the Conservative Drug Policy Reform Group, which is not just conservatives, it's an all-party group, but basically advising government policy on medical cannabis. And so, yes, there's so much being done in the UK. I also do work with some North American groups, and I've spoken at the UN on this topic. So there's a lot happening. Some people say it's not moving as quickly as we'd like, especially with the kids with epilepsy who really need it now, but it is moving.
It's just absolutely incredible. And thank you so much for saying that. I mentioned at the top of the show that I was just so interested in this area. We have a prize every year for the communication of ideas, and we gave it to David, I think, in 2014. And it was a totally different landscape then. Yeah. There was just one conversation, and it really was about the illegality getting in the way of testing what the benefits could be medically. And to just hear you, say everything that's now possible, and, being able to see how this is going to be made available is just so heartening. I think, as you say, plants shouldn't have morals attached to them.
Yeah, I mean, it's really changing. I was invited by the Royal College of GPs to give a lecture in, I guess it was the beginning of, in the spring. Oh no, sorry, it was the beginning of the year. And that was such a momentous thing. I couldn't believe that they asked me, and it was so well attended and it was so well received. And, we were polling people, we were polling the physicians who were there and asking them what they thought about medical cannabis, and should medical cannabis be prescribed on the NHS? Should it be considered on the NHS? And the overwhelming opinion was yes. These are conventionally trained GPs. I mean, it was just such a warm response. They were just so open-minded. Of course, you're selecting for the people who show up to a cannabis talk. But, things are changing.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Dani. Okay, you mentioned some of the sort of active ingredients or the elements in the plants themselves, and I think I think a lot of people will understand perhaps CBD oil or things that you can buy over the counter, and I think a lot of people may have even bought that and tried it but not really got any benefit from it, but there seems to be a world of difference in what you could buy, and I just wondered if you could just expand a little bit about what you're actually buying, what you can buy, and why it matters, what you're buying, what the ingredients in what you're buying are.
Yeah, it's a great question.
There was a great question in there somewhere.
No, it is a great question. There's an entire chapter in the book on this, so that's how long the answer could be. But to sum it up, basically the most common form of CBD that you're seeing on the shelves is in an oil that you take by mouth, so liquid. And the types of CBD are various. So you could have CBD isolate, which is just CBD. You could have a full spectrum, which has some of the other plant chemicals that may kind of help it work better at a lower dose. And then you have this thing called broad spectrum, which is in the middle. So as of next year, the products that are considered the broad spectrum or the full plant variety, it looks like they will no longer be legal. So we're probably just going to be seeing just the CBD only products on the shelf. And then when it comes to the CBD products, no matter if it's full spectrum or CBD on its own called CBD isolate, everyone's dose is going to be different. So, and that's because our endocannabinoid system is different, and it depends what you're using it for. It depends how well your body absorbs it, all of these different factors. So there's no one set dose for every person. So there is a method to dosing it, and it really depends on what you want to get out of it, where you're using it for, individual factors, which I go through in the book. But just to sum that up, is basically what's called the start low, go slow approach. So you could start with a CBD oil, for example. You could drop it under your tongue with a meal 2 or 3 times a day. Start with 10 or 15 milligrams at a time. And then you can just monitor whatever kind of issue you're trying to improve. If it's a wellness issue, if you're buying it without a prescription. If it's a medical issue, of course, that's medical cannabis. You're going to be under the care of a doctor, so that's a bit different. And then you can just see how you feel. Generally, CBD from hemp, the products you're seeing on the shelf, usually they tend to work better for chronic conditions the longer you take them, the more consistently you take them, because we think it kind of helps balance our endocannabinoid system. Although that's a very broad, wide sweeping statement that sometimes scientists would cringe at, because it's way more complicated than that. But especially for people who might have a dysfunctional endocannabinoid system. One of my colleagues who's also, featured in the book, Dr. Ethan Russo, he's done a lot of research in this area, the endocannabinoid deficiency syndrome people. So I get a lot of these people in my practice, a lot of my patients. And these are patients who suffer from fibromyalgia, chronic migraines, chronic fatigue syndrome, all of these things that kind of overlap. Irritable bowel syndrome. And for them, it seems to really help balance their endocannabinoid system. Their symptoms really improve when they use medical cannabis, and usually high CBD forms. So as far as what to buy, what to look for a product that has what's called a COA, or Certificate of Analysis. And again, I go through this in real detail in the book because this gets really nitty gritty. But basically, that's a way to see if the product you're buying is what it says it is. And it doesn't have any nasty stuff in it that you don't want, like, heavy metals or pesticide residues or anything like that.
I know, I couldn't believe it. It's so fascinating, like the type of plant, the yield it has, how bioaccumulant it is, into where it's been from. It's really fascinating.
Yeah.
There's one I want to talk about, some areas that it's being used for, and the subtitle of your book is Cannabis and the Wellness Revolution That Will Change Your Life. And I think the first area where it's really easy for people with little experience of the drug to see what the benefits could be is when you talk about chronic pain.
Mm-hmm.
And the numbers are really distressing. I think you say in your book that chronic pain affects up to 50% of the UK population. You put that around 28 million people. It's hard to think of that much suffering without relief. I found the chapter really moving, and especially the case studies of people saying that they found pain relief with using CBD or cannabis 10 years after suffering chronic pain for 10 years, and were angry about the way that they had been through it without being helped. So it just really caught my eye that cannabis could be the single most helpful medicine you've used for chronic pain. So I just wanted you to talk a little bit more about that, how it does it, and how it works.
Yeah, it's incredibly effective for so many different types of chronic pain, because chronic pain can come from, we can have pain in the brain. We can have pain that starts at an injury and then it can move to the brain as the pain becomes chronic. There's so many varieties of pain. You can have, pain in the nerves. You could have pain after you've had chemotherapy and cancer. You can have pain at the end of life. You can have joint pain. I mean, the list just goes on and on. You can have pain from autoimmune diseases where your body's just really inflamed, and that causes a lot of pain. So what I found universally with any of those pain syndromes is cannabis. You can usually find something within the cannabis medicine family to help somebody. And one of the things that people always ask me is, I've already tried a CBD oil over the counter for my pain. It didn't really work. So if you have really severe chronic pain and you're already taking pharmaceutical medications,
like opiates,
then a lot of times,
like opiates,
opiates that were perfect example, gabapentins, those kind of drugs. Oftentimes hemp CBD, especially in the small quantities people use and a wellness product, won't really do much for them. But when you go to the prescription side of things, which you can get now in the UK, not on the NHS yet, but we're working on it, with a little bit of THC, that is a really effective way of using the cannabis plant for chronic pain. So the little bit of THC that you get on the prescription side, and sometimes even like an even ratio of CBD and THC, we use that a lot too, once people are kind of used to it a little bit. That is a very effective pain medication. So it really depends on the person and the type of pain, what's best for them. That being said, I have met so many people who have used high doses of an over-the-counter, very high-quality hemp CBD product for just aches and pains, chronic arthritis pain, muscle soreness, muscle recovery after sports, and found it very effective. And even CBD, I use hemp CBD topicals because that's all you can buy here legally on my hand. And I still find when my nerve pain flares up, because of course it's a chronic condition, it's not going to cure my hand pain. I have damaged nerves. I have lots of stuff going on in my hand. So it's the way it is. But I do find, a good quality product, you rub it in and it does help. So you can certainly start with the over-the-counter way of doing it and see how far you get, and then move to a prescription product in the future if you need to.
Thank you. And good luck with your work to get it being able to be prescribed on the NHS.
Thank you.
I just wanted to finish off with pain before we move on. And, it really blew my mind, this idea that you can get locked into a cycle of pain when it comes to chronic pain, and that the body can't break that cycle. And even traditional painkillers can keep you locked in or make it worse. I just wondered if I'd understood that right, and if CBD could help break that cycle.
Certainly there's something called opioid hyperanalgesia, which is a big fancy way of saying sometimes some of the pain medications we use, and another medication that could fall under this is the headache migraine medications, some of them, when we have to overuse them. And it's, to be clear, this is not because patients are abusing them. It's because they just need to take more and more to get some kind of pain relief. I think that's really important. This is not placing the blame on the patient, which I think is really awful. But these are people who have just had to use such high doses for so long that the brain starts to respond in the opposite way to these medications and starts to be hypersensitive to pain. But it's a vicious cycle, because if you stop the medications, then the pain also can get worse. So what do you do in these situations? This is where cannabis is so helpful. So I've successfully weaned these types of patients down, sometimes completely, sometimes to very low doses. We go up on the medical cannabis and we go down on the other pain medications over time in a really controlled fashion. The other way that pain really gets ramped up in the brain is with the kind of we call it the limbic system, the kind of the reptile brain response to pain, where we go into fight or flight. So in the past, people have called us, oh, it's the pain is psychosomatic, they just have to go to see a psychiatrist. And sometimes therapy can help the talking through, dealing with the pain, but the pain is actually in the brain. It's biological. What happens is that the fight or flight system, the alarm system, gets triggered by constantly being in pain all the time. So the brain is just on hyper alert all the time. It's kind of like sitting like this all the time, just waiting for something else to happen. And when the brain is in that state, you can get very high levels of anxiety. It's really like a biological anxiety. And then eventually the brain just gets pooped out, and that's when you get depressed brain. So that's why people who have chronic pain, they often get depression. And then an antidepressant may help them with the depression, but they're still grumbling along with the chronic pain, and it never really gets better. Or sometimes they don't even respond at all to the antidepressant, because it's really about the chronic pain. And then there's the fatigue. So cannabis can help with the mood, the anxiety, the fatigue, the sleep, and then they're not sleeping. So when we don't sleep, we know it's like we're drunk. It's potentially worse than driving drunk when you don't have good sleep on a chronic basis. So chronic pain is just really, really complicated.
It is. And thank you. And it's just explored so brilliantly in your book. You mentioned brains, and I really we're covering such a pace, Dani. Sorry, I'm having to work so hard.
Let's go for it.
Just put on my notes. There's so much to cover in this talk. There is. But I wanted to ask you about the health of our brains. A big part of the book is about improving brain wellness, about brain aging, about neurological disorders. But you also work with extremely high performers to achieve a state of peak performance. Can CBD really help with both?
Well, what I say about the brain is the same things that help keep the brain happy and regulated are the same things that go wrong when you get a lot of these chronic brain degenerative disorders like Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, the dementias, and even things like multiple sclerosis. So the things that we need to keep our brain healthy, the brain needs to make energy. The brain needs to be able to calm down easily. The brain needs to be able to make new brain cells, so grow all of its connections. It needs to be able to get rid of waste products from the brain cells, because just like every other cell in our body, the brain cells make waste. You have to take it away. And the last thing the brain has to do is it has to be able to fight inflammation. So these are all things that are related to, guess what, our endocannabinoid system. And the different cannabinoids show great promise in many of these areas. So cannabinoids as a family, so that's including CBD and THC and the 120 cannabinoids in the plant. It's very preliminary research, but it shows great promise for these conditions where we have, like in Alzheimer's, we have these plaques that build up, these tangled, awful things of inflammation that build up in the brain and they cause damage. And we used to think that, we just get rid of the amyloid plaque, everything's great. But now we recently have discovered that the amyloid plaque in Alzheimer's that causes all the problems is actually related to a dysfunctional immune reaction in the brain. So if we can target that earlier with potentially things like CBD and other cannabinoids, THC even, it really shows promise. So that's where it's going. Where it is right now, on the medical side, it can already help people symptomatically with multiple sclerosis, potentially even slow down disease, potentially. We don't know quite yet, but potentially. symptoms of Parkinson's, symptoms of dementia, agitation, helping with their sleep. I use it in all those capacities. And then on the wellness side, I use it as part of a wellness supplement stack. So there's this whole thing called nootropics. So it's basically taking wellness supplements and mindfulness practices all combined together to make the brain function optimally. So I do this with CEOs, have really busy schedules. I do this myself. We combine it with brain training and brain imaging and all kinds of other stuff. So CBD is part of the stack that I use with people. And I use it alongside a lot of other botanicals and a lot of other natural supplements too.
It's really interesting. It just hadn't occurred to me before that, your brain as an organ could be aging prematurely, or that, and it sounds like you're talking about, fairly soon we could be looking at, putting our own sort of stack, as you put it, together in terms of to protect our brain and to protect our brain health. Is that right, Dani? Yeah.
Absolutely. That's what I do for people. And there's a whole science behind brain aging. Dr. Dale Bredesen at UCLA, he is kind of the leading voice in this. And him and I both spoke at our big conference. I did the Cannabis talk and he did the brain aging talk a few years ago. And he has an amazing book called The End of Alzheimer's, if you're really interested in this area.
Oh, yeah.
But basically, yeah, that's this whole area of research, is how we can potentially reverse brain aging. And he's proving it with brain imaging studies, using things like botanicals, nutraceuticals, all these natural things combined together in really specific cocktails.
It's fascinating, and that it's a huge issue for so many people. It's and again, it's something you go into in detail in the book. But we only have a certain amount of time together, and we have got some questions coming through, which I want to get to. I want to touch on stress. Because we're really interested in stress in Salon. We did a Salon about it earlier in the year. It was absolutely huge, so popular. We also last year did a Salon on burnout, again, just absolutely huge. And I just wondered, why you think we're suffering so much from stress and burnout, and again, what role can we take in our health by using cannabis or CBD products?
Yeah, it's an epidemic. The other part of my work, my other expertise area, is stress, resilience, and burnout. And that's actually the second book I'm writing right now. So it's close to my heart. I'm a type AAA personality too, so I have to use these things myself.
Hang on a second. Klaxon, science term Klaxon. You're a AAA personality.
Yeah, I just go. So, I have to use these things myself. I have to meditate. Because I have to bring myself back into balance. And we live in a fast-paced world. I love working. I love my work. But, it is hard nowadays to keep balance, because we live what I call an anti-sleep environment, a stress-prone environment. So, how this relates back to CBD and cannabis, it's the kind of the perfect, I call it the perfect botanical helper for modern life. And again, I stack it with other things. So I use it as a meditation support for people. They take it before they do their little morning meditation practice. I use it with other botanicals that fight stress, other natural things that fight stress. And the reason it seems to work, the hemp CBD certainly seems to really be helpful here, is because CBD seems to work in the area of the brain that controls the fight or flight response and the cortisol response, the stress hormone response. So the brain has an area called the hypothalamus that talks to our adrenal glands. And the adrenal glands sit on top of our kidneys and they produce cortisol. So CBD seems to kind of dampen that reaction. So it's very effective as a tool for helping to manage stress. And secondarily, the better you manage stress, the better you sleep, and the less inflammation you have, and the less worry you have, and all these other downstream effects from stress. Stress is not this nebulous thing. It's a real health problem.
Yeah, it's just beginning to see it, I think. And sleep. We must do a Salon on sleep. We must. It's really interesting talking about which is obviously yes. What am I trying to say? It's just occurred to me as you were talking that we can all become a lot more involved in our management of stress, and we can all, even as a casual user, perhaps, bring in some CBD into our lives to protect our brain and to help with stress. What really interests me is that, over the last 10 years, we've seen in Salon a real movement towards a more natural approach to managing our mental health, and a more drug-free, a more kind of trying to take more complementary. You mentioned meditation a couple of times, breathing, and science has proved these absolutely work, work in terms of our mental health. Why do we need the cannabis if we are moving towards more natural ways of managing our mental health?
It's a great question. So I mean, I'm a meditator myself. I love meditation. Excuse me. That was perfect.
Have some water.
I should tell people I'm 7 months pregnant, so the baby's starting to take up space, and I just got a big kick.
Congratulations.
Wondering what that was. Thank you. So when it comes to kind of now I've lost my train of thought after that. We're talking about stress.
We were talking about the move towards more natural ways of dealing with our mental health, yes, and trying to move away from SSRIs and into something that people are taking up meditation and trying to move away from drugs to help their mental health. Yeah. And I just wondered, why do we need the cannabis if this is what we're
right? So I love meditation. I practice it myself, but it's a really long-term strategy. So it takes 8 weeks on average of 20 minutes a day of meditation practice to see a change in the brain. And I also have patients and clients who are meditation teachers. They've meditated for years religiously, and they still have really high levels of anxiety, or they have depression that doesn't really move or budge. So I think it's an amazing tool. And I always say they'd probably be worse off if they didn't have their meditation practice. But sometimes you need a bit of a quick win. And that's where botanical medicine can really help. And that's where CBD can really help. And sometimes medical cannabis too. So it's not a cure-all. It doesn't magically make all your problems go away and you're just running through a cornfield, singing for joy. But as far as a quick win and a really good add-on, these are things that really do help. I've used high CBD medical cannabis to wean people off of other anti-anxiety medications that they were stuck on for years that had a lot of side effects, like benzodiazepine class of medications, for example. And some of these patients, when they got referred to see me, they didn't think they had any hope of getting off because they had tried so many times. So it can be quite a powerful tool. And, when it comes to stress and sleep, because I do a lot of work around sleep as well, I always tell people sometimes it's about removing something. And sometimes it's about, adding a practice like meditation, which is always great. But if your nervous system is vibrating up here, like I have so many patients in my practice that they cannot meditate right now because their nervous system is so on edge that they have what's called meditation-induced anxiety. When they sit down and they start to think of their thoughts, or they start to just be with their thoughts, they have a panic attack. So when someone just keeps telling them, just meditate, just try harder, that's really not helpful for them. And the other way that it can really help with stress is in place of other things we do that are not so helpful for stress. And David Nutt talks a lot about this as well in his book on alcohol. So what we do at the end of the day, people want to go have a glass of wine. And it initially makes us feel less stressed, but then it has a rebound effect and it actually makes us feel more stressed and more anxious. So if you come back and you have a CBD mocktail instead, and you just, use that instead of alcohol in places where cannabis is legal, some people use low THC cannabis vaporized for this purpose. And it's definitely with hemp CBD and probably even with, lower THC cannabis, it's a much healthier alternative to alcohol.
Okay, yeah, and I think you write about socializing, the possibilities for socializing, which it was really interesting. And yeah, I did. It was unusual to read. I think you call it yogic guilt. This idea that because practitioners who are brilliant at their jobs but have their own anxiety because then feel that they haven't cracked it. Who has cracked living?
It's huge. It's a hidden, honestly, it's such a hidden problem in the yoga and wellness community. So a lot of my clients are from that community. I mean, I'm part of that community myself. I have my stressful days too. I mean, sometimes I just have a really stressful day and I feel stressed. And this is one of the things I talk about when I talk about people with resilience is it's not saying that you're never going to feel stressed again. That is a fantasy. Anyone who is posting on their Instagram all day about how they never feel stressed, I don't believe them. But it's about how quickly we can bounce back. So when you have a bad day, when you have a stressful day, when you have a meltdown, how quickly can you bounce back and get your brain and your body down to that calm, nice, balanced state? And that's what it's all about. And that's what everyone has the capacity to do, no matter how bad you are at it. As a lot of my patients say, I can't calm down, I can't meditate. But you can always, it's a skill our brains learn again and again. And definitely botanical medicine, CBD can really help.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think there's so much advice in the book in terms of what might be available for which area and how to start, and how you can kind of begin to test it out for whatever you're looking at it, to work with cannabis alongside. This book is a guide to that. So, and you can buy it from us. So please do, if you would like to. I'd like to open, so we've got a time for a couple of questions. And we have a question from Molly, and she says, it's really interesting to hear about the uses of cannabis. Would you advise using CBD for brain health if you are really wary and unsure about taking cannabis? I guess, can it cause anxiety if you're still fearful about it?
CBD hemp products cannot cause anxiety or make you feel intoxicated, so that's a really safe place to start. So a really good, just a good quality CBD product from hemp that you can buy in a health food shop or buy online from a reputable company, that is certainly a very, very safe place to start.
Thank you. We've got a question from Elena, and she says, we've talked a lot about the benefits of cannabis and CBD. What, if any, are the side effects?
It's a really good question. This is a whole chapter in the book, so I'm going to try to condense it down. So when it comes to CBD from hemp, again, the side effects are mild to non-existent for most people. But if you have something called POTS, which is postural orthostatic hypotension syndrome, basically low blood pressure and fatigue, then sometimes the CBD, if you take a lot of it and you're not used to it at one time and you don't build up, can make your blood pressure dip a little bit lower and you might notice it. If you're on certain medications, you should talk to your doctor before you try CBD. There's a whole list of those in the book, which I don't have time to go through, but they're in there, I promise. And then on the medical cannabis side, when you're coming to things that have THC in them, there's some people who shouldn't take THC, at least generally, although in some cases that might be a one-on-one conversation. So for example, someone who has an unstable heart condition, for example, you wouldn't want to smoke a high THC or take a high THC product because it can trigger palpitations and put more strain on the heart. We do use it in people who have history of heart problems, but only when they're stable and only under really tight medical supervision. There's some mental health conditions that people suffer from where I wouldn't prescribe THC containing cannabis, but CBD is still very safe. So there's a lot to say on that topic, but generally speaking, hemp CBD as a supplement is very safe. I always tell people, as far as the safety threshold goes, compared to some of the other botanicals that are on the shelves that I also use, that are available without a prescription, it's way safer. But of course, if you're not sure, always ask a doctor, just to be on the safe side.
That's really interesting, and I know through doing events with David, the question of psychosis always comes up. Yeah. Is that something that that people tend to be wary about when they're even approaching cannabis and CBD?
Yes. So CBD products from hemp cannot cause psychosis. CBD is actually an antipsychotic in the brain, so it helps psychosis. That being said, if you have psychosis, you should not be self-medicating with hemp CBD. You need to see a doctor, obviously, but it's certainly not going to make the problem worse. That being said, THC, there's a complex relationship with psychosis. And one of my colleagues at Cambridge University, this is her specific area of study for the last 7 years. So cannabis and psychosis. So really interesting research. She's just kind of starting to publish some of the new stuff now, is that some people, there's a really small percentage of people who might be genetically more susceptible to high amounts of THC triggering a psychotic episode. It doesn't mean it wouldn't have happened anyways. It's not making them have schizophrenia. It might just unmask something that's already there. But certainly certain people respond in different ways to high levels of THC, like recreational smoked cannabis, but it's really only a small percentage of the population. And interestingly, people who have already been diagnosed with schizophrenia, which is a chronic psychosis disorder, it's a very serious mental health condition. Some of them self-medicate with cannabis and high THC cannabis, and it seems to decrease some of the side effects they have from some of the medications. So in some cases, there's something about THC in some people with psychosis that it might actually be helpful for them in some ways, but it's really complicated. So it's not something to kind of play around with yourself. If you suffer from one of those conditions, certainly working with a doctor is the safest way to go.
Yes, and I've just realised as you were making that point that we hadn't made the point. You know, we are talking about we are not talking about being able to. It is not a good idea to self-medicate with cannabis that isn't prescribed or hasn't been bought from a reputable place to buy it. I think I should probably make that clear.
Yeah, we have to follow the legal frameworks. So really, we're talking about hemp CBD when we're talking about trying it yourself, and then medical cannabis on prescription here in the UK.
Yeah. Thank you. And actually, we've got a kind of lovely question to sort of bring us to a close from Warren. And it is, he says, I think one of the big revelations throughout his lockdown is just how much of an issue sleep has become. And I think, you know, this year, the sleep has been a huge problem for so many people. And he just wondered, yes, if there was any advice you could give on cannabis for good sleep.
So sleep is a whole chapter in the book. Again, I'll try to distill it down. It's a pretty long chapter, but most sleep disorders, run-of-the-mill insomnia, is a disorder of 24-hour nervous system hyperarousal. What that means in plain English is the nervous system's jacked up 24 hours a day, not just before you go to sleep. So it's not just about taking something and hoping it's going to knock you out before sleep. There's a whole program usually that most people need to do, including winding down the nervous system, removing light at night, blue lights, all kinds of things. CBD, pure CBD by itself, it does not put people to sleep, generally speaking. Put people to sleep, generally speaking. But certainly on the medical cannabis side, we use higher THC medical cannabis in an oil before sleep for really severe insomnia. But if you're on the CBD wellness side and you want to try it, how I use it on the wellness side is I use it throughout the day to help reduce the cortisol levels, the stress hormone levels, because that impedes sleep later in the evening. And then in the evening, I combine it with other botanicals that help promote sleep. So on its own, taking a big dose of CBD right before you go to bed is very unlikely to make you sleep. So that's how you can try using it.
Oh, Dani, thank you so much. Perfect timing for a question on sleep. We were really wanting to get clarification over the wellness and medical properties in cannabis and where we were in the UK and the situation for prescribing medical cannabis and the future. And you've done that so brilliantly. Thank you so much, Dani. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you. I hear a rumour you might be at Also Festival this summer.
I'm there. You've already sold me. I'm coming.
So I really hope we can go into some more detail and do this again in real life. It has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much, Dani.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here for our talk with Dr. Dani Gordon about the CBD Bible. This is a superb book for anyone who's looking to find out a little bit more or wants some more information on some of the issues we covered and some of them that we didn't. It is available in our virtual bookshop, so please buy it from us, not them, and we will send it to you. Thank you so much for being part of this salon. See you soon. This salon is now closed.